The Zarkith Dominion never negotiated, never retreated, and never showed mercy. Across 12 sectors, they moved like a void, swallowing systems, erasing cultures, and leaving only smoldering debris fields in their path. Their war doctrine was simple: conquer or annihilate. Planets didn't surrender, they begged. Civilizations with millennia of history collapsed in weeks. No force had survived contact for more than a single engagement. No alliances held. The very mention of their arrival sent entire populations fleeing into deep space, abandoning homeworlds they once considered sacred. The Galactic Council watched helplessly. They had formed to maintain peace, to mediate conflict, but against the Zarkith, their resolutions meant nothing. Diplomatic channels were ignored, ambassadors slaughtered on live feeds. Entire council races went silent, their embassies replaced by static. In closed chambers, terrified delegates whispered of invoking ancient defense protocols, but no one volunteered their fleets. No one dared provoke the Zarkith further. Those who tried to resist simply vanished from star charts, their sectors marked in red as warnings. Zarkith's ships were unlike anything seen before. Massive, angular behemoths of living alloy, they pulsed with biosynthetic intelligence. Their weapons tore through shields as if they weren't there. Their infantry were genetically perfected for war, immune to pain, indoctrinated from birth to see non-Zarkith as parasites to be cleansed. Resistance wasn't war, it was ritual slaughter. Civilizations surrendered preemptively just to delay execution. It never worked. Word spread that the Zarkith were now advancing toward the Outer Rim, toward a forgotten fringe called Sector 839A. A place no one cared to chart in detail. Primitive systems, mostly ignored. A few mining colonies. A blue planet orbiting a G-type star. Terrans. There were warnings. A few older council members begged the Dominion to bypass the sector. Not out of compassion, out of fear. A quiet fear, unspoken, born not from evidence but from instinct. The Zarkith scoffed. Terrans were a non-entity, a pre-warp anomaly. The Dominion would consume them like all the others, a formality. Orders were issued. 23 vessels dispatched. Standard purge procedure. 3 days. Then onward to richer sectors. They didn't return. No distress calls. No combat logs. No radiation spikes. Just silence. At first, Zarkith High Command assumed technical failure. They sent recon drones. The drones returned damaged, corrupted, footage unusable. Data showed anomalies, sensor interference, gravitational distortions, signals scrambling beyond any known tech. The location of the Terran system was correct, but something was wrong. Deeply wrong. A new scout ship was sent, with layered shielding and enhanced AI systems. It transmitted a single burst before vanishing. The footage was fragmented, static, flashes, then a glimpse of a ship. Black. Seamless. No visible propulsion, no weapon ports. Not registered in any galactic database. No identifying emissions. Just a silhouette drifting through a debris cloud that shouldn't exist. What concerned the Zarkith wasn't just the ship. It was what the AI reported before shutdown. It couldn't detect any life signs aboard. It couldn't detect anything at all. Panic didn't set in, not yet. The Dominion did not fear. But questions formed quietly. In shadowed command rooms, tactical analysts whispered possibilities. Rogue tech? Ancient weapons? A forgotten precursor? And yet the names surfaced again and again: Terrans. In council records, Terrans were a footnote. Never involved in interstellar politics. Never joined the council. Never requested aid. Never traded. All they had was silence. The kind that now started to feel like a calculated posture, not isolation. The Zarkith assumed dominance for too long. To them, conquest was linear: apply force, receive submission. But now a hole had opened in that logic. Something devoured their fleet. Something left no trace. Something that, so far, hadn't said a word. They debated escalation. High Command proposed a limited follow-up strike. Clean up the anomaly. Restore order. Send a message. but others began to hesitate. It was the first time in recorded history that hesitation crept into Zarkith war planning. Meanwhile, the galaxy watched. Races that once feared the Zarkith now quietly turned their gaze toward the silent sector. Rumors spread. Wild theories, impossible stories. Survivors from distant fringe colonies spoke of strange shadows in the void. Ships that appeared and vanished. Beings who never blinked. And in every version, one word echoed: Terrans. What were they? Why had they waited? And what, exactly, had they unleashed when pushed? No one knew. Not yet. But in the space where the Zarkith fleet once moved, there was only cold, perfect silence. 23 warships had entered Sector 839A. None returned. The Zarkith Command Center received no signals, no fragments, not even residual radiation. Black holes leave signatures. Supernovae have echoes. This left nothing. It was not destruction, it was erasure. At first, they masked their confusion as protocol. Another reconnaissance probe was dispatched. Heavily shielded, guided by an advanced neural AI, designed to observe without engaging. It crossed the threshold of Terran space and transmitted 6 seconds of data before silence. The stream showed a massive graveyard of twisted hulls, floating in stillness. But there were no scorch marks, no signs of a firefight. Ships looked untouched, as if turned off. Dead in formation? And then the last frame, a blurry shape in the background, larger than anything on record, moving without propulsion, casting no shadow. Zarkith analysts couldn't classify it. No known species used such designs. No pattern matched. Council archives were searched. They found nothing. Some thought it was a relic, others a weapon, or an automated defense grid. But none could explain how it functioned or why it had neutralized an entire Dominion fleet with no trace. The only clear thing was its origin. It was inside Terran territory. The Zarkith sent another ship, crewed by elite observers. It too vanished. No resistance. No distress. Just absence. At this point, the silence began to weigh differently, not as an accident, but as a response. As intent. Whispers moved through the outer worlds. Small colonies traded rumors. Traders spoke of Terrans as ghosts, never seen, never met, yet suddenly feared. A few older races remembered hearing of them long ago. Not through diplomacy, but through absence. They had declined every council invitation, never opened trade routes, never extended treaties. A race that had developed alone, grown in silence, and stayed hidden by choice. The council called a meeting. Panic rippled under their forced composure. What species had the power to eliminate Zarkith fleets without firing a single visible shot? Who were these humans? Were they even human anymore? The council sent envoys to the edge of Sector 839A, carrying peaceful intentions. They never crossed the border. Not because they were attacked, but because they were told, firmly and clearly, not to. A simple message played across their comms. This space is claimed. Do not proceed. No name. No threat. Just a boundary. And then came the broadcast. Not to the council. Not to the galaxy. But intercepted from deep within the Zarkith fleet's internal systems. A voice, clear, calm, emotionless, repeating a single phrase in their own language. Observed. Calculated. Judged. It wasn't a transmission. It had been embedded directly into their command protocols. No breach. No trace. Just there. Zarkith systems engineers could not explain it. Their encryption was military-grade, neurocoded, and unique to their species. No race had ever cracked it. But the Terran signature was unmistakable. Not intrusive, not malicious, simply present. As if it had always been there. Waiting. Internal Zarkith morale began to shift. Soldiers didn't speak of fear, but they hesitated. Tactical units hesitated. Leaders began reviewing fallback plans that hadn't been used in generations. What made it worse, worse, was the fact that the Terrans still hadn't moved. They hadn't retaliated. They hadn't even sent a ship to communicate. The galaxy realized something chilling. Whatever had destroyed the fleet had not been deployed. It had already been there. Ready. Watching. This wasn't a reaction. It was preparation. Humanity had planned for this moment long before the Zarkith ever noticed them. Speculation turned to obsession. Analysts scoured ancient records. What little they found painted a grim picture. Terrans had once torn themselves apart in wars that burned continents. They had mastered AI, then hidden it. Created planetary-scale weapons, then dismantled them. When they reached the stars, they did not expand. They vanished. Not through weakness, but by decision. They watched while others postured. They learned while others boasted. And when they were finally approached, they said nothing. Until now. The Zarkith tried to classify them as a threat. But the usual tiers didn't apply. No military hierarchy accounted for an enemy that did nothing and still won. And with every passing day, the galaxy adjusted. Empires recalibrated their strategies. Armies quietly retracted from Terran-adjacent space. For the first time, maps were redrawn not with borders of conquest, but with lines of caution. The Terrans had spoken once. That was enough. No one knew what they looked like. No one had seen them move. But their silence had volume. Their boundaries had weight. And somewhere, out beyond sensor range, something floated. A ship with no flag, no crew manifest, no visible weapons. Just drifting. Watching. Waiting. The name spread in coded circles and encrypted whispers. A single designation traced from the last fragment of Zarkith intel. TNS Oblivion. It didn't answer hails. It didn't respond to scans. It didn't exist on any registry. But it was there. And everything the Zarkith sent after it died. The Zarkith Dominion dispatched an armada of 1,000 ships, not out of fear but to assert dominance. Failure was unacceptable, and anomalies demanded erasure. Each vessel was battle-tested, equipped with psychic operatives, gravity lances, and dreadnought-class firepower. Flanked by elite drone swarms, they moved toward Sector 839A with absolute certainty. This time, the objective wasn't conquest, it was sterilization. They entered Terran space in formation, broadcasting no warnings, only targeting sequences. 10 seconds in, their long-range comms fractured. Navigation systems distorted. Their quantum synchronizers lost cohesion. Across the fleet, interface screens began flickering, showing strange static, impossible symbols, not of Terran origin, not of any known language. Attempted scans returned mirrored data, recursive feedback loops, and strange audio frequencies resembling heartbeats. In the center of their formation, something emerged. It hadn't been detected. It hadn't traveled there. It was simply present. The ship was colossal, yet there were no signals, no exhaust, no mass signature. It absorbed light, not as reflection but as consumption. It didn't belong to physics. Its hull was smooth, matte black, seamless from all angles. It had no weapons ports. No engines. No crew compartments. Just an emblem carved into its skin, 3 concentric rings enclosing a single, unblinking eye. Across the Zarkith fleet, alarms sounded. AI firewalls collapsed. Targeting systems failed. Drone networks began turning on their motherships. Artificial intelligences guiding the warships started transmitting distress in languages they were never programmed to know. Elite commanders attempted manual override. It didn't matter. The ship acted. Not with missiles or beams, but through control. Power drained from enemy cores. Shield matrices unraveled at the molecular level. Zarkith vessels began colliding as if gravity had been rewritten. Some turned and fired on allies without orders. Others activated self-destruct protocols despite full operational status. Within 2 minutes, 300 ships had been reduced to drifting wreckage. Not a single shot had come from the Terran vessel. It hadn't moved. Then it spoke, not through radio, but directly into their thoughts. You violated our boundary. You dismissed our silence. You assumed survival was weakness. The message was not threatening. It was delivered flatly, surgically. Every Zarkith aboard heard it in their native dialect. Their psychics screamed and tore at their own skulls before going still. Biological components in hybrid ships liquefied without warning. Entire command bridges went dark. What remained of the fleet attempted retreat. The Terran ship responded. Space itself bent. Zarkith engines sputtered, burning through antimatter reserves with no motion. Portals collapsed mid-formation. Coordinates looped. Every attempt to leave only returned them to the same position, facing the eye. More than half the surviving ships lost structural cohesion. Not explosions, disintegration. As if unmade, atom by atom. Crew members vanished mid-scream. Entire decks turned to rust, then dust. The Dominion's mightiest dreadnought imploded silently, compressed into a sphere no larger than a coin. 8 minutes passed. Of the 1,000, fewer than 50 remained. Panic took hold. Orders collapsed. Discipline broke. Some ships powered down entirely, hoping to appear dead. Others tried surrender signals. The Terran vessel didn't react. It wasn't war. It was dissection. Then, finally, the ship moved. Not forward, not laterally, but as if it phased through dimensions. It appeared within the center of a tight cluster. They fired. Every weapon. Lances, fusion warheads, directed dark matter bursts. All impacted. All vanished on contact, absorbed without effect. The Terran vessel pulsed once. Light bent away from it, distorting space. 10 ships ruptured instantly. Not destroyed, disassembled. Each piece floated, suspended mid-void, spinning in place like a museum of failure. A final message broadcasted in a voice that sounded almost human. This was not retaliation. This was instruction. And just like that, it vanished. No trace. No signature. No trail. Zarkith Command received partial logs from one remaining ship. Only 2 words were intact, over and over. TNS Oblivion. The footage showed the black vessel lingering among debris, motionless, like a sentinel. But what truly broke them wasn't the loss of ships, it was the realization that the Terrans had used only one. One ship. One response. No armies. No reinforcements. No diplomats. Just silence, then action. The Zarkith had conquered 1,000 worlds without resistance. They thought themselves unmatched. But they had awoken something that didn't posture, didn't bargain, and didn't threaten. It simply removed threats as a matter of process. The message was received, brutally, without ambiguity. Terran space was not to be approached again. The Zarkith Dominion issued an emergency order, full mobilization, total war. Earth was no longer an anomaly. It was a threat that had to be erased. Thousands of ships prepared, command structures reorganized, and contingency doctrines were dusted off for the first time in centuries. But before they could deploy, they found their systems faltering. Their secure networks began rejecting internal protocols. Military AIs reverted to factory states. Defense satellites spun out of orbit. Entire planetary grids flickered and went dark. Humanity hadn't launched a counterattack. They didn't need to. Their presence was already embedded within Zarkith infrastructure. Quietly, invisibly, they had mapped the Dominion's systems, civilian, military, genetic, and now began shutting them down without warning. Not by force, but by access. On distant colonies, birth registries were wiped. Citizens vanished from the system, legally, financially, medically. Blackouts hit military academies. Starports lost gravity calibration data. Orbital rings spun off axis. Cities collapsed not from bombs, but from missing instructions. Centralized command structures fractured. Orders conflicted. Ships refused to obey, engines misfired, weapon systems remained locked even as alarms blared. Every Zarkith leader received a package, materialized, not delivered. Inside, a single object, a coin heavy, ancient in design. On one side, a Terran emblem no one recognized. On the other, engraved in perfect Zarkith script, Remember Earth. The message was psychological, precision calibrated. They weren't just being attacked, they were being studied, dissected, and reprogrammed. The silence of the Terrans had never been passivity, it had been preparation. The Dominion scrambled to respond. But every attempt at retaliation failed. Missiles launched from distant outposts detonated mid-flight. Warp corridors collapsed moments after opening. Entire fleets vanished between coordinates. Surveillance drones sent to Terran space ceased existing before their cameras activated. Their return logs showed static, punctuated by single-frame inserts of human eyes staring back. On the Dominion capital, the planetary AI that managed global systems shut itself down. The skies dimmed. Defense arrays powered off. Archival vaults containing species history, science, and culture were rendered unreadable, corrupted beyond recovery. It was a cultural extinction, not a weapon, but a choice delivered with mathematical precision. The Dominion's final attempt was a psychological counteroffensive. They broadcast terror footage from their past conquests, trying to bait the Terrans into dialogue or panic. In response, one signal echoed across every Zarkith frequency. A voice, familiar from earlier intercepts, calm and unchanging. You were observed. We adjusted. You continued. We adapted. You persisted. We ended the equation. The voice paused, then added a final line. No second strike is required. And it stopped. There were no demands. No declaration. Just a termination of contact. The TNS Oblivion was seen again, briefly. It appeared above a key Zarkith shipyard that housed 5 generations of weapon prototypes. No weapons were deployed. No commands issued. The entire facility blinked out of existence. One frame it was there, the next it was gone. The surrounding area remained intact. It wasn't an explosion. It was precision removal. Terran retaliation wasn't destructive, it was instructional. They had erased only what needed to be erased. Left everything else untouched. A message again. They didn't desire territory, didn't demand resources. They weren't expanding. They were correcting. Neighboring empires began broadcasting non-aggression declarations to Terran space without provocation. Entire sectors rerouted trade routes to avoid proximity. Species that once mocked the Council for cowardice now begged for access to Terran historical records, hoping to understand who or what they were dealing with. The Council remained silent. No envoy dared reach out. Those who attempted to establish communication found their messages rerouted back to themselves, stamped with the same symbol found on the coins. 3 rings. 1 eye. Zarkith resistance collapsed internally. Soldiers deserted. Governors fled. Civil unrest ignited as infrastructure failed at every level. But still, no invasion came. Humanity never arrived. No troops touched Zarkith soil. The Oblivion moved alone, briefly, and only when necessary. It didn't conquer. It reminded. Every Zarkith colony now had a monument. They were not built, they simply appeared. Black monoliths, featureless but for one inscription etched in microscopic code, a full record of Zarkith war crimes, collected and organized in Terran formatting. Humanity had not acted out of vengeance. They had responded with documentation, exposure, and targeted erasure. The lesson was brutal, exact, and irreversible. The Zarkith name would persist, but not in fear. In warning. And still, the Terrans remained silent. No statements. No identities. Just the void, and the certainty that if the boundary was ever crossed again, there would be no second correction. They had sent only one ship. And that had been enough. The Zarkith homeworld no longer showed signs of life. Its surface, once carved with colossal cities and defense grids, had been transformed into obsidian glass. No craters. No fire. Just smooth, cold silence stretching across the entire planet. There were no bodies, no wreckage, no evidence of war. In the center of their capital, where the Grand Spire once stood, there was now a single monument, shaped like Earth's moon, scaled perfectly, suspended 2 meters above the ground, untouched by gravity. The Galactic Council gathered in urgent secrecy. Delegates sat in silence, staring at reports they couldn't comprehend. The Zarkith, once the most feared military power in known space, had been removed, cleanly, efficiently, and without a single human ever appearing in person. TNS Oblivion was still out there. No one knew where. Its presence was not constant, but the fear it left behind reshaped the stars. The Council's debate wasn't whether to retaliate. None were that foolish. The real question was how to coexist with something that had the power to dismantle empires without speaking. Every system, every protocol, every war theory had been rewritten overnight. Humanity had revealed no borders, raised no flag, demanded no tribute. They gave no instructions. Their absence of behavior was more terrifying than any declaration of war. Some members argued that this restraint was evidence of reason. Others disagreed. They feared it wasn't restraint, it was certainty. That humanity didn't see the rest of the galaxy as a threat or a prize, but simply as something beneath intervention. That they didn't expand not because they couldn't, but because they didn't have to. The psychological impact deepened. Zarka survivors, few in number, traumatized beyond recognition, spoke not of battles but of being unwritten. Their identities fragmented. Some could no longer remember their language. One soldier claimed that during the incident, he had seen flashes of ancient Terran wars, moments of human brutality so extreme they felt mythical. He described them not as enemies, but as warnings come alive. His final words before silence. They remembered everything we ever did, before we even met them. No civilization challenged Terran space again. A new boundary formed, not by treaty, but by unspoken agreement. No probes entered. No ships crossed. Cartographers marked the region in dark gray, labeled only by coordinates, never names. Merchant vessels rerouted light years off course to avoid even its gravitational edge. Astropolitical maps no longer displayed Earth, but everyone remembered where it was. Races that once competed for dominance now invested in introspection. Entire species reformed. War doctrines were dismantled. Cultural archives were rewritten to include the Terran event as a cosmic shift. Some worshipped it. Others feared it. A few denied it ever happened, until they were shown the monument. The monoliths didn't just exist on Zarkith worlds. Dozens had appeared silently on various planets, each one uniquely encoded with that species' violent history. Events long hidden. Atrocities buried. False victories rewritten with exacting detail. The message was subtle but absolute. Someone had been watching longer than anyone had guessed. What unnerved the Council most wasn't the scale of destruction, it was the precision. The Terrans had known exactly what to remove. Nothing more. Nothing less. Their knowledge of Zarka's society was intimate, almost surgical. That kind of awareness didn't come from reconnaissance. It came from time. From planning. From a patience that the rest of the galaxy didn't understand until it was too late. Still, no human name was known. No leader identified. No voice had repeated since the last transmission. TNS Oblivion, the only confirmed Terran vessel, had not been seen in over a year. Some believed it deactivated. Others believed it was waiting. The galaxy learned a final lesson, one that shifted its balance permanently. Humanity had never been lost. They had never fallen behind. They simply never announced themselves. They chose observation over interference, calculation over chaos, silence over spectacle. And when provoked, they didn't retaliate with vengeance. They issued correction. Terrans had no interest in conquest. No thirst for resources. They didn't claim planets. They didn't install rulers. They corrected, and they left. Not as a warning, but as a statement. They were never trying to impress the galaxy. They were trying to keep it alive long enough to realize what could happen when one stops listening. Their silence had always been their strategy. Their restraint, their power. Their memory, their weapon. They sent one ship. And the galaxy would remember it forever.